Good morning. Today we're going to take a few minutes and talk about the layers of the atmosphere. After this, I'll have a video and some activities for you to work on with a partner or in groups. Let's get started. If you take a look at the layers of the atmosphere, there's four main layers. The bottom layer where we live is called the troposphere. Then we move up to the stratosphere, the mesosphere, and the thermosphere, which is split into two layers. The bottom part of the thermosphere is the ionosphere, and the top part is the exosphere. Your paper is set up into two columns, the left side for taking notes as I talk, and the right side for drawing pictures of the things that you would find in each of the layers of the atmosphere. Please feel free to use colored pencils, and be sure to pause the recording often so that you can get all the information you need. Let's get started. First, we're going to start off with an infographic looking at the layers of the atmosphere. As you can see, the layers of the atmosphere start at the bottom in the troposphere where we live, moving up through as we increase in altitude above sea level. The lower you are in the troposphere, the more densely packed the air molecules are. The higher up you go, the thinner the air becomes. Therefore, there's less pressure the higher you go in the atmosphere. Let's start with the first layer. The first layer is the bottom 12 kilometers of the troposphere. Be sure you're at the bottom of your worksheet when you begin taking notes. Tropo means turning or changing. Weather occurs in this layer. As the altitude increases, the temperature decreases. Imagine if you were climbing a mountain. You know as you would climb up the mountain, the higher you go, the cooler you would begin to feel. For every kilometer you increase, the air actually gets colder by 6.5 degrees Celsius. At the very top of the troposphere, the temperature stays about a negative 60 degrees Celsius. Two things that are important to add are that most of the air in the atmosphere is actually in this layer of the troposphere. 75% of the atmosphere's mass is in this layer. You might want to make a note of this and put a star on the left-hand column at the bottom in the troposphere. Now it's time to do some drawing. There's a lot of things we'd find in the troposphere, including living things, weather, hot air balloons, a flock of geese, and a Boeing 747 cruising right near the top. Now, when we're talking about weather, we will find some clouds in the troposphere, but the rest of the clouds that we find will actually be in the stratosphere. The stratosphere is 12 to 50 kilometers above sea level. Strato means layer or spread out. And as you'll see in a minute, the stratosphere is actually one of the thicker layers. The stratosphere is where you'd find the ozone layer, which is a combination of 3 oxygen molecules bonded together. The ozone layer protects living things from the dangerous ultraviolet rays. Recently, there's been some scientific evidence that we've been releasing gases that damage this ozone layer. Our country and others have reacted by starting some legislation to eliminate these contaminants from the atmosphere. These contaminants are called chlorofluorocarbons, otherwise known as CFCs. They can be found in refrigerator and air conditioning coolant, used to be found in hairspray and styrofoam. The last thing that's important to know is that the stratosphere is actually very cold, about a negative 60 degrees Celsius, which would be about a negative 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the upper stratosphere above the ozone layer actually is warmer because it's a bit of air. Because it's a layer of air with much more ozone than the rest of the atmosphere. When the ozone absorbs the energy from the sun, the energy gets converted into heat, warming the air. Take a second and draw some of the things that we would find in the stratosphere. We'd find ozone molecules, a Blackbird SR-70 and many other reconnaissance military planes, and we'd find cirrus and cumulonimbus clouds. The mesosphere is the third layer from the surface. Meso means middle, and it's 50 to 80 kilometers. The outer temperatures in the mesosphere reach negative 90 degrees Celsius. The mesosphere is the layer of the atmosphere that protects the Earth's surface from meteoroids. The thermosphere is the top layer of the atmosphere. Remember, it's split into two smaller layers, but first let's look at the overall thermosphere. Anything above 80 kilometers is considered thermosphere, and thermo means heat. It's unusual that it means heat because we would think that the thermosphere is actually very cold. Here's the real story. Remember, the higher up you go, the thinner the air goes. The air up in the thermosphere is only 1,000% as dense as the air at sea level. It's a lot less dense. It's kind of like you took 1 cubic meter of air and expanded all the air in that cubic meter to 100,000 cubic meters of air. It's hot because the sunlight strikes the thermosphere first. All that nitrogen and oxygen convert this to heat. Even though there's a high temperature, it wouldn't feel warm. The thermometer would actually show temperatures well below zero. Why? Well, temperature is measured as the average amount of energy of motion of each molecule of a substance. That sounds really complicated, but really it just means that the gas molecules move very rapidly, so the temperature is really high. But since these molecules are spread so far apart in this thin air, there's not enough to collide with the thermometer and warm it very much if it was up there. The thermosphere is the outermost layer of the atmosphere, but doesn't have a definite outer limit. It actually blends right in with outer space. Like I said earlier, the thermosphere is split into two parts: the ionosphere, the bottom piece, and the exosphere, the top. In the ionosphere, energy from the sun causes gas molecules to become electrically charged particles, which we call ions. In the ionosphere, radio waves bounce off ions. This is where we'll find the aurora borealis, which we'll take a look at in a minute, also called the northern lights. The International Space Station floats about 300 kilometers above the Earth's surface in the ionosphere. Exo means outer, and the exosphere goes for 400 kilometers outward into space. The exosphere is where you might find artificial satellites for making phone calls, or your direct TV network, or also unmanned spacecraft. Here's a picture of what the aurora borealis, also known as the northern lights, looks like in Yukon.